Okay, thank you for being here today. I'm really honored to participate in the panel devoted to Christie Davies. I was lucky to be a participant of one of the humor conferences and summer schools and where Christie was, and so I witnessed Christie's talent as a scholar and as a mentor. His unique personality, vast knowledge were keenly shared with both experienced researchers and newcomers in the field. He's greatly missed at humor conferences, but we can see that his work and influence will definitely live on. So the topic of my today's presentation is dimensions of rural humor. All dimensions that are used to describe humor seem to be dependent on social and cultural stages that a joke teller shares with the audience both in global and micro contexts. So targets seem to be one of the crucial parameters to be discussed at today's panel because it is closely related to social and cultural contexts. So my presentation, or rather invitation for discussion, will consist of two basic parts. The first part will be dedicated to some general issues that refer to humor text understudy, and the second part explores the targets used at humor festivals in the text understudy, which were collected at humor festivals in Appalachia, the United States, and of Turkey, Belarus. At the end, I will try to interpret the findings of this study. When I started looking into Belarusian humor, the first problem I faced was the material for research. I believe any humor researcher encountered the same problem. Besides the classical pragmatics problem of what parameter helps to identify a text or fragment of discourse as humorous, whether it is intention of the speaker or reaction of the audience or some other formal text characteristics such as script overlap. There are also some other considerations that can't be ignored. The critical role of social, national, geographic, and time context should also be taken into account. One more problem is the definition of comic discourse as such. Very often the incorporated fragments perform a range of functions, and there are cases when fragments do not perform the entertaining function. The fragments that can be considered as comic ones, like jokes, for example, that are integrated in some other kind of discourse. So a question arises whether such fragments, such jokes which function in some other type of discourse, that is not inherently humorous, can be considered as belonging to humor discourse only on the basis of some formal characteristics or structure. To avoid such issues, we tried to find a sample which main purpose would be to entertain and to provoke laughter. Another problem I faced while choosing the material for research was connected to globalization issues. Besides growing homogeneity of jokes on the internet, which make national features redundant to some extent, Belarusian humor experiences heavy influence of Russian culture. Common language and historic past, political, economic, and media issues result in common communication space. Belarusian jokes and Russian jokes tend to share the same language, plots, and targets that are equally enjoyed by Belarusians and Russians alike. So the material understudy seemed to meet all the above-mentioned criteria. The texts understudy are taken from festivals of folk humor in Bay Area, Appalachia, and Autuki, Polessia region. Both regions are geographically isolated. Therefore, we can hope that globalization affects them insignificantly. The humor festivals provide the uniform pragmatic context, the humorous frame which leaves no doubt as to pragmatic intention of fragments of discourse and also audience perception. The festivals were held practically in the same period, in the 1990s, so we can also conclude that time and place overlap. So the festivals were conducted in the same period and in the same place. So here you see the pictures of American Laughter in Appalachia, Festival of Appalachian Humor, and one of the festivals in Avtyuki. So, but the similarities between the two samples seem not to end here. The organizers of the festivals are writers that come from the regions in question. The secondary pragmatic function of humor, as well as the pragmatic load of those introductions that you can see on the screen, seem to be also very similar. So humor is seen as a sort of coping mechanism that helps to overcome life hardships and challenges. So now let's have a look at historical and social background of the groups. Both groups share the same social status in the national communities. Similar, let's call it similar. Let us not exaggerate. Okay, geographic isolation resulted in economic and social backwardness with a range of issues to be tackled: alcohol use, out migration to the cities, aging population, unemployment. Regions are seen by, well, representatives of power as historically deprived regions. The region of for region of Appalachia, the major issues were moonshining and also coal mining that became redundant with the time, and so a lot of people remained unemployed. For Avtyuki, it was the Second World War, because they're a part of Belarus, which suffered a lot during the Second World War. And from, well, recent events, we can call Chernobyl disaster, because it is the region which is the closest one to Chernobyl. So a significant part of the territory was is now uninhabited because of Chernobyl. So here you can see also some differences, assumed differences. So let's have a look at the stereotypes. So both Appalachian has been heavily stereotyped in mainstream America. It is portrayed as a barefoot savage with rotten teeth, dressed in dirty overall, playing a banjo. It is a popular target of hillbilly jokes. The Arkansas dialect spoken by Appalachians is often viewed as a synonym to ignorance, aggression, savagery. The stereotype is actively exploited and spread by mainstream and mass media. In the 1960s, the comedy sitcom Beverly Hillbillies was exploiting hillbilly stereotype, portraying hillbillies failing to adapt to new mainstream reality. An Oscar-winning Deliverance tells the story of three friends who became victims of inhuman atrocities committed by hillbillies. Numerous books on hillbilly culture feature cases of incest, feud, ignorance, alcoholism, poverty. So the festival, the organizer of the festival, Loyal Jones, president of the Center of Appalachian Studies at Berea College, sees his mission in changing the negative stereotype of inhabitants of its native region. In his article, Appalachian Values, he claims that Appalachia is a reserve of the values and lifestyle that have been lost by the mainstream America. It is this contrast between two value systems that, he says, that lays the basis for numerous hillbilly jokes. The values that hillbillies hold dear become targets for city dwellers. So the festival seems to pursue another goal. Thank you. To pursue another goal is to change the stereotype, to turn it from negative into positive one. As it was stated here, hillbilly has been an established joke stereotype. We tried to find some parallels in Belarusian culture, and we found such stereotypes as kolkhoznik. You can see a picture which is similar to the stereotype of kolkhoznik, and maybe bulbash, which is rather a stereotype, an international stereotype for Belarusian nation rather than rural population. But still, I would say that Avtyuki festivals, they rather establish a new stereotype, a new comic stereotype, because we have not found in folklore such a figure as Avtyukovets. Although people, inhabitants of the village, they claimed that there was such a figure, humorous figure of Avtyukovets before the first festival was held. So some more pictures. So these can be called non-humorous stereotypes that are spread in the media. The picture on the left is from Appalachia. The picture on the right is Avtyuki. This is how these groups would like to see themselves as it is reflected at the festivals. So on the right, you can see the picture of Kolosok and Kalinka taken, so they are dressed, and these are the actors that performed at the festival, and they are dressed in traditional Belarusian clothes. This is the way they are portrayed in all the advertisements that talk about this Avtyuki festival. So we can see evident difference. So while the American festival aimed to change the existing stereotype, the Belarusian festival tried to set a new image, a new stereotype of Avtyuki dweller. While the Appalachians are trying to confront the mainstream culture, the Avtyuki dwellers are trying to negotiate with it. They are trying to make themselves known and remembered by representatives of the mainstream. I'm going to look at targets as a parameter that is often used by the group to delineate its identity through dichotomy us, others. From social perspective, the dichotomy correlates to center-periphery opposition. Jokes about deviant behavior are attributed, can be understood as jokes about others. The group of others could be further subdivided into groups. So the group which demonstrates deviant behavior, the group which does not demonstrate deviant behavior, and where the aggression is shown just on the basis of belonging to the group of others, and the virtual reality where the joke teller wins over the group, a representative of the group of superior others. So if we look at the sample material shows that the groups that Avtyuki dwellers laugh at can be divided into following groups. So Avtyuki neighbors. But when we look at our jokes, we can see that not always can we say that it is the neighbor which is laughed at, because very often at the end we see an Avtyuki dweller who loses, like in this joke. There are some jokes where we can find representatives of other nations. We have some jokes about Jews, but even when an Avtyuki dweller wins in that particular, let's call it wins in that particular joke, then there comes a sort of conclusion, like the one you see on the screen, which shows that Avtyuki dwellers identify themselves with the Jews. There are some cases, similar cases with Chinese targets. This is a very curious case. It is a monologue of an Uzbek citizen who is married to an Autyuki, who has a wife from Autyuki, and he seems to deny his Autyuki identity, but still he says that others call him Autyuki dweller. So this, for me, it seems to be a very curious case when script positions the deviation lies in the fact that others are identified as us. And so the majority, the dominant part of jokes feature Autyuki dweller as a joke target. So there are some examples of it. This joke is also interesting because this is actually the most frequent genre of the texts that were found at Autyuki festivals. This is a form of monologue where the two parts, they exchange insults with each other. So in humorous terms, it can be called bantering. So here we see some statistic data. So the majority of the targets belong to Autyuki dwellers, then come Autyuki neighbors and some foreign targets. So now let's have a look if the same situation will be found in Appalachian material. So here we see a lot of jokes. Maybe the largest part of jokes are about preachers. They are seen as either others or, well, there is some more closeness between the joke teller and the joke target in case when the preachers belong to the Calvinist congregation. This joke is similar in its linguistic mechanism. It is similar to jokes about tourists. So in both jokes, we can see that there is a sort of communicative failure. So the local person seems, not to understand what he is asked and seems to give wrong answers, playing dumb. So in linguistic terms, it can be maybe determined as a deviation from a linguistic Grice's maxim of relevance. So the answers that are given are not relevant to what is being asked. And this also can be interpreted as a feature of communicative behavior inside the jokes of locals towards others, towards some outsiders, let's call them. When a local priest when they talk to local priests, they still play the role of joke targets, but the communicative situation inside the joke is quite different. There is communication going on here. Still, the priests are, laughed at, but the communicative situation is different. So, and the last group of others for Appalachians is representatives of power that are compared, for example, in this particular joke, they are compared to lawbreakers. So there seems to be, in the humorous context, there seems to be no difference, no line between a representative of legislature and lawbreaker. So in some jokes, Appalachians do joke at themselves. And what is interesting is that some of these jokes are taken from the mainstream folklore. They are taken from, so they are the same jokes that circulate about Appalachians, so representatives of mainstream. They tell these jokes about Appalachians, and Appalachians tell these jokes about themselves. So the same deviation seems to serve seems to serve different functions. Not about the others, but about ourselves. So they seem to accept it. They seem to accept this stereotype well, just a curious thing to see and maybe to discuss later on. So here in this joke, we also have an Appalachian judge as a joke target. And again, we see that this joke is narrated on behalf of the judge, right? So well, I would say that the major position we can observe here, maybe not the only one, but one of the major for me, is that this little Appalachian judge who is expected to speak dialect speaks highbrow English. So one of the oppositions is between, again, dialect and standard English. So here, when we look at Appalachian joke targets, we see that most of the jokes are told about the others. So our Turkey sample shows that most jokes, it is demonstrated on the right, they are told about ourselves, about our Turkey dwellers themselves. So it is self-mockery, and in case of Appalachian jokes, it is a joke about others. So while Appalachian humor constructs the identity by drawing a border between us and others, our Turkey dwellers seem to target their humor at themselves. Why do they do so? So there might be a lot of reasons. So the simplest reason could be is that this is a national feature of Belarusian humor. But it seems to be not the only possible hypothesis. So some of the other hypotheses may include also a gender issue, because the majority of participants at Belarusian humor festivals are elderly women. And the males seem to perform a minor role at those festivals. Therefore, this self-mockery can be maybe gender and age-specific to some extent. And another version could be is the national maybe characteristics again of this type of performance. So it is a kind of genre specifics for Belarusian festivals. It is dialogue. There are a lot of people who are coming up to the stage, and you never know their names, and they perform a sort of performance in front of the jury, and jury come from, usually they are all city dwellers, writers, and representatives of power. So maybe they're not supposed to joke at, for example, city dwellers in that case. And at Appalachian festivals, we see men who are joke tellers, and they perform in front of other Appalachians who seem to share their values. They seem, they are from the same background. Okay, so one more issue that could be considered is that in case of self-mockery, is it true that when we laugh at ourselves, we laugh at our negative features? Do we accept these values that are mocked in those jokes as our negative traits? So if we have a look at these two jokes, both of them reflect moonshining traditions in the two cultures. So this one is from our Turkey region. And so we see here that the old man, the moonshiner, seems to win, right? So does it mean that, moonshining seems to be a negative trait, right? So on the other hand, we see this man who wins. So does it mean that it is still accepted as a negative trait by our Turkey dwellers, or do they, declare it as their value? This is an example from Appalachian collection. So we see here a sheriff who is successful in spotting some moonshiners. So the sheriff wins, so it can be assumed from this fact that he wins that this is a negative feature for Appalachians, moonshining tradition. Do they accept it or do they deny it? Just putting up with it or just accepting and declaring it as a positive value? Okay, just 1 second. So another two examples where we see from the point of view of win-lose situation, again, can be interpreted these examples as values or deviations from values. Again, there is another also interesting situation here because how can we interpret this, his reaction, Autiki dweller reaction? He loses temper at the end of the joke. So does he win or does he lose? Here, this witty retort of an Appalachian seems to be, of course, puts him in the winning situation. So, final conclusions, maybe not conclusions, but some points for discussion. So one of the points is about maybe gender issues, that sometimes the role of joke teller in some cultures, in some contexts, can be attributed to women. Then another point is that human identity can be constructed not only through inward strategy by delineating the others, but also through inward strategies that seems to focus on this particular group, on themselves, and thus declaring or the values or just accepting the negative features of their, identity. So we see, also we can interpret these joke targets in terms of national characteristics. So as we saw, these joke targets were conditioned by dominating genres of humor festivals. It was stand-up for Appalachia, so storytelling and tall tales, and it was bantering and short dialogues, drama sketches for Autiki festivals. So these issues remain open for discussion, I believe. And so this is the invitation to visit Autiki festivals. There is one official invitation in 2 sentences where we see beautiful festival settings, and the woman says, just welcome to Autiki festivals. And this is how inhabitants, dwellers of Autiki, interpreted this invitation in their own way. So they say that just do not bring anything but only color TV, file to sharpen sauce, American money to everybody, as we have brains but no money. We still sow potatoes at night for them not to be seen and eaten by Colorado beetles. Call 5 neighbors to milk a cow, hold the chicken by a paw, produce burbulator, and do not eat zakatki. In short, twirling like a squirrel in a circle, because we know the one who twirls lives. We do not worry, the time comes, we shall be stopped. We kiss you from A to Z. Autiki men, Autiki women, and Autichanyati children. Thank you very much for your patience. Sorry for having taken more time than it was expected. Thank you. Are there any questions?
But this isn't so much a question as a comment. That joke about the person banging the nail in.
Yes.
Now, back in the early 1960s, I can't tell you how early, I was in the Reading Young Farmers, so in a club in the middle of Berkshire, surrounded by farmers. And that was a joke that we had. here, that nail is for that wall.
So
it's interesting that you've got
yes.
it at such a distance.
Yes, so is it a universal plot that was appropriated? And there is a very nice also joke in Turkey about this particular feature. They say that we have a lot of jokes that they have in other cultures. Yeah. This means that our Turkey jokes are famous all over the world. So they put it the other way around. Of course, they appropriate a lot of jokes because they lack their local folklore. So they have to do it. They have to build their own identity.
This you see is pre-internet. So I'm wondering how the joke travelled.
I think there is also a big influence of the organizers of the festivals, at least of course, in the context of Turkey. There is this Belarusian writer who does contribute as much as he could in many possible ways, not only financial support, but many other things. I do have some videos to see, but well, maybe if someone is interested, I can show later, because there is one video of the festival, then some years later, we see another video, an advertisement of the Museum of Laughter, which was opened in Turkey. So this is for what they used humor, in order to commercialize and to make, well, the region known by the rest of the world. Any other questions? Yes, Vladek.
That's, the whole idea that the festival as if created a stereotype.
It was, as far as I can see it, that was its major function, because I have not found any sources in 19th century, in the 20th century folklore, in those scarce folklore sources that we have in Belarus. I have not found any mentioning of Turkey as a humorous figure. Neither have I found Polishuk, because this is Polessia region, so there could have been Polishuk as a generalized figure, right? I haven't found any. Maybe there were some jokes in circulation. Local people from neighboring villages, they do say, yes, Turkey, would you like to live in Turkey? No, I would never like it. So they try to distance themselves. Even those inhabitants of Gliniana Sloboda, they say, no, I would never like, because they are just like joke target. But on the other hand, they willingly visit those festivals. So yeah, I think it is a sort of constructed identity, I believe, humorous identity, which serves to declare, we don't know what, either it is values or some negative features. It depends on what side, on what stance we take, the stance of the norm or the stance of deviation. And from these two sides, we can see at this situation differently. That's what I think it is.
For example, in Poleshuk, in any stereotypes at all, he's got a non-comic stereotype with someone who is, gloomy or rather sort of humorless Poleshuk.
Aggressive.
Or sentiment, right?
Aggressive, because Poland also.
No, it's like sad, gloomy. Right?
Yes.
That's the only one I can think of. Right?
Yes, I haven't found either. And so there is also this very peculiar function in many jokes. So joking to complain. And I also wonder whether it is because, again, of gender issues and of age issues, because if you look at those festivals, all women, and some men that are just playing harmonica, and that's it. And when you look just at some videos and just stroll around the village, you see only elderly women there. It seems like there are no men there. Such demographic feature. Okay.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you for your attention.